Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. It's Barry Eustance here from the Just Great People podcast. I'm joined again, delighted to welcome for the second time, Adrian Stratta. When we last spoke with Adrian, we promised that we were going to do a podcast on leadership and adaptive leadership and embedding in organizations. This is right up Adrian's street. And actually, whilst we're on the topic, Adrian's joined the Success Consultancy as a strategic partner. So if you go to our About page, you'll see Adrian there and all his significant capabilities that he's bringing to the Success Consultancy offering. So Adrian, listen, welcome. Delighted to have you again. The last time we met was in the Loomies Cafe on the A32, drinking far too much caffeine. Welcome.
And I do like my coffee, but it obviously has an impact.
Yes, that's right.
No, it's great to be here. We were going to talk about adaptive leadership, which is kind of a rapport, really, culture often trumps strategy and so forth. But I come from a background where culture is absolutely embedded and very important. I talk about the military. The military is a very strong culture and ethos. And of course, it's in business, you have to create that and you have to forge your own culture, which I think is very, very interesting. And to cut a long story short, pre-COVID, it seems so long ago now. It seems like, but we had a business with some friends of mine. The guy who was the academic amongst us was from Harvard and Warwick and Oxford business schools. And we were talking about adaptive leadership, like the Heinfeld and Linsky model, which is really, really interesting. And the model for that business was really to take it to various business leaders, CEOs of the FTSE 100 or whoever, to help them think about leadership and what their culture could or should ought to be. Really interesting model. It was an interesting process. We called it a good crisis, which was, how to get through a good crisis. Plan before, plan in, plan after. But the principles of the model that really are still resonant today. And actually, perhaps we can talk through some of those and see what you think and understand how and where and why the relevance and why the military are so interested in it and how a lot of commercial thinking is coming back into the same era.
And you've got this very strong military background. The crossover from the military to the commercial environment, is that one that is supportive of the adaptive leadership model? Are the two so different to the military and the civilian and corporate environments? Are they so different that there's no overlap? What's your perspective on that, Adrian?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I think people in the military world, services generically, it can be conceived to be a sort of command and control. I tell you, you do X way of thinking. Well, actually, it's actually quite the opposite. And you're empowering people at the lowest possible level to make and take decisions according to the overarching goal, the mission or objective or whatever you want to call it. I think the other difficulty with comparing the services to commercial world is when you join the services, you essentially subordinate all your personal aims and objectives to the good of the mission or whatever you're doing, the organization. Whereas in the commercial world, it's not. You're actually doing business all the time and you don't have that opportunity and that bandwidth to train and prepare and then go and do the business. You're actually at the business essentially all the time. So therefore, you've got a very different culture. And through training in the military, it's the training and the preparation, the build-up that builds the essential trust between the leaders and the operatives, if you want to call them that. That trust is so endemic, and that forges then your culture. But there's a principle in the military which I think works reasonably well and can apply, called mission command. And if everyone understands what the overarching mission will be, we've got to attack that bridge in order to secure that village or town and beyond. Therefore, if you could capture the village and task beyond and not necessarily take the bridge, you can still be successful. So if the short-term objective can be circumvented, and that's all part of getting into the mindset of what's required at the higher level. Again, I'm not entirely sure that all businesses really go there and really understand that, firstly. And secondly, it's about the individuals in that commercial world that they're pushing their agenda. And how do you fuse the two? And I think that's where there's an opportunity. And that's where this adaptive leadership, and there's 7 principles of adaptive leadership that we look at and follow through and see how that applies.
Yeah, that'd be great. And if we can go through that model, and actually, I'm sure that you will take us through the practical application of that model in the corporate and organization environment. So please go ahead, Adrian, because I think our dear listener and viewers will be more than interested in quite how that can be applied to their own particular case.
No, indeed, sounds good. But I think the first thing is that, like any consulting and any organization, you've got to understand what you're going. You do the discovery phase. Well, that applies internally as much as externally. So the first principle is sort of called get on the balcony. Some of the language is a bit new world, but if you're on the balcony, what it essentially says is you're removing yourself from the organization to look down on that organization. There's that famous phrase that says, if you've got your business, you work in your business or on your business. And actually, if you have the ability to step aside and look back and be reflective as a leader on your business, to look at the systems and processes, but the behaviors and the impact of those behaviors, it is very, very interesting. And what we did with the crisis was to actually put all the leaders into it to do an exercise, a task that was recorded. And it's something they would not have done before. And then we use modern systems to create simulation and create things that they had to react to events they would have no previous reaction. So it's their innate behaviors and processes that were being recorded and observed. And then that's a one-to-one confidential feedback later. So you could see them when they're under pressure, under stress, trying to get people to do things. How do they behave? So a lot of it is behavioral as well as procedural. And I think a lot of consulting and change and principles and cultural is always saying that you've got to do this, there's a process for that, and you've got to do A, B, C, because it's all about the systems, getting the systems. It's all about people and how do you get into the mindset of the people. So then the second, you're on the balcony, you're looking down, and then there's the opportunity to change. So the second principle is about identifying the adaptive challenge. So once you've identified what you can change, how are you going to do it? How are you going to define that? And what is the approach for dealing with that? There are many. There's a growing trend in some of the consultancies and chat that I listen to online that talks about creating multidisciplinary teams or glass tube, and that's almost the same. It's identifying the challenge and getting everyone in the organization to understand what that challenge is and recognize that we've got to change.
Is that what we would call typically a strategic vision, but that's something that embodies, if you like, a higher purpose, something that people can really hook into emotionally rather than just, we're going to raise profits? Well, for a lot of people, that's a right turn off. Whereas something that is going to benefit the community, it's going to be good for ESG, etc., is something that people can become emotionally engaged with. Is that what you're alluding to here?
I think the emotion is absolutely important. It's that call to arms. It's what's in it for me. And making profit, great. For somebody else, on the back of my heart, well, it doesn't always resonate, as you're absolutely right. But so what is the emotive part of that? How can you engage them at the real heart center and say, right, this is why we're doing it? And the ESG piece is equally important. But if you go too far down that road, you're not going to engage everyone. It is how can you make their job easier, simpler, and more effective. So ultimately people come to work to exchange their time for money. And if they're not enjoying that, they're very often not going to reflect their best work. But if you can give them a piece of decision-making power or engage them that their voice has heard, they can have a contribution to the outcome of that, even if it's something flying a plane, driving a train or a bus or whatever it could be. If they're engaged in some of the performance outcomes, they can improve their own personal delivery in that area. They're engaged within the process. And engagement, a lot of it's all about how can you engage people, create the holding environment. So that's where the relationship that holds the work and enables the work. So if you're going to push in a second area, so if you're doing a change or transformation, it's not a sort of side of desk activity. It is a core task. If you're changing and transforming the business, that has to be driven or directed from the top, enabling as many people as possible. And that requires that work to be held in an environment, because if you're just doing it in the normal day-to-day, the normal day-to-day of life will take over, and therefore the change opportunity might not take root or be seen because you're not holding the environment of that change. And then the fourth point is about cooking that environment. But The point being is that actually you then need to test that, and does the change actually work, and is it going to be effective? And that can only happen if you're really going to test it in a real state. And again, that comes back to exactly the same with some of these multidisciplinary teams. Glass tube is an easier way of talking to it, that actually you've got experts from across the field. So you've got the accountant working with the social media, with the customer accounts or technology, or so everyone's got an input to say, I can see that's a better way of doing it, or that doesn't work for me, or if it doesn't work for me, how can we make it work for me? So there's ways to understand that the environment of technical change, therefore the culture of engagement, can be improved, rather than simply saying, right, we need to do this top down for more money.
And that top down, do this for more money, is very classical, isn't it? It's almost the traditional go-to place when people want to do change. What you're alluding to here is very aligned. Sorry, I was going to say is very aligned to the concept of volunteerism, getting people involved at an emotional level, where actually the performance gains are massive, aren't they? What if you take someone who's disengaged and isn't emotionally engaged with something? It's a very workaday kind of experience. Whereas you have someone who's actually engaged and at an emotional level, suddenly their output, their delivery, their enthusiasm, their creativity, innovation goes off the scale, doesn't it, in the upward direction?
And taking a step back and answering that, before we get to the fifth point, which is really, it's maintaining the disciplined attention to that work. Turned around a business by 3 principles. It's about, pride, respect, and communication. Pride in your work, pride in your business, pride in the things that you're doing, and the output that you're creating, as you say, the individual in the respect for yourself, respect for your colleagues, respect for your equipment, place, and job you're doing, and communicate. It's all about communications. We're all humans. And if we don't operate at the human level, and you want to turn people into automatons, you're actually asking them to be something they're not. I saw something the other day that, why do you want to do something, go to work, and then go home after your 9 to 5 and be yourself? Why aren't you yourself at work? It just doesn't make sense to me. So
I agree.
You've got to bring yourself and your whole of yourself to that. And that relates to that, maintain the disciplined attention to work. As you're saying, subtle difference if it's like technical work or more creative work. If it's technical work, like you're coding or you're creating something or doing accounting, or where it's very sort of mandrolic, or you're packing boxes in a factory or whatever, it's very hard to in that physical or mental sort of transactional way to get yourself into it. But actually, if you could say, well, I'm the best box packer there is, and I can do it quicker, faster, better, in a neater way, and the output is far more improved, then you're bringing yourself to work and you're actually engaging yourself in that whole process.
Also taking that person that you've just addressed there, so on the shop floor packing boxes, innate within that individual might be this leadership that, if it is unleashed, can bring a huge amount to the overall strategic vision, can't it? It's the people who are right at the front, who very often are seeing what the C-suite and the people above them and behind them don't. And their leadership in terms of unpacking that, taking the box analogy, folks, sorry for the pun, is that they can bring insights that otherwise would not have been to the benefit of the vision or the organization itself. So it's encouraging leadership right across the organization.
9 times out of 10, it's very much a military thing as much as a commercial thing. Most of the problems are solved at the grassroots level, and they can see the problems because they're dealing with the problems, and not necessarily the C-suite might not be alert to it or blind to it. That's not always the case. They may recognize it, just need to drive on for different reasons. But the point being is that actually the solutions to a lot of these perceived issues can be resolved at the lower level. Coming back to another business I turned around, we took out a layer of management, which was a shock. We can't possibly do that. We did, and some stepped up. Others came back to a more comfortable level. They were better at operating at. Therefore, it made it leaner, and it was then easier for the leaderships with the passion and those that wanted to resolve issues. They had a greater chance and a greater opportunity to present their voice and say, this is a smarter way of doing it, or we can do it, or we're all stepping up, we're all in together, so they're motivated. The whole point about the culture and the vision is to get the head space of people aligned to where you want to go to. And in a military sense, the true test of leadership is to get those below you to do something they don't want to do.
Yes.
Jump out of that plane. Well, who wants to jump out of a perfectly serviceable plane, which is what we said
We've
last
discussed
time.
this earlier in our previous podcast.
Exactly. So that ultimately, if you can get them in the headspace that they're going to do it because there's a justifiable reason, or they're engaged with the process or solution, that, as you said earlier, will pay dividends massively. It's not always that easy. It's not always that obvious. But until you communicate and look at the system and you start testing, that's the point about getting on the balcony and saying, well, I want to go from A to B. Is that the right way to go? And how do I do it? Me just telling them isn't obviously the solution. So creating that empowering, engaging culture right at the start that says, this is where we think, want, or would like to take the business. Where would we go with that? Is that the right direction? It takes time and it's longer and in the discovery phase. But as they say again in the military, time spent in reconnaissance is never wasted. So it's always very interesting. And it's therefore the sixth point, which is give back the work to the people with the problem. So actually, okay, we want to go from A to B, but you're suggesting we should go to C. Do you still want to go to C? So actually, therefore, you're testing the reality. It's like your dry runs, isn't it? It's like you're testing, right? But this is how we're going to rebuild our car or whatever it might be. Right, let's test that. Let's see if that works. And is there still a smarter, if more efficient ways of adapting to make it work? And I always lock on to the final one, which is probably where you're going to ask the question, which is protecting the voices of the leadership from below. So it's actually, once you've created that culture, it's very easy to throw rocks at it. And actually, if you're going to change something and you want to create a new initiative or a new process, why are we doing that? Oh, it's not the way things are done around here and this and the other. Oh, that's not going to work for these reasons. All of that. We've all heard thousands of those, haven't we? Right. But this is the way we've decided we're going to go and actually get on board or not on board. And if you're going to come on board, what are you going to bring? And how can we embellish this? And it's like a sort of snowball, isn't it? How can you create that snowball and protect the naysayers? And when you get to the bigger organizations, I don't want to single out unions, but a unionist environment can create the naysayer environment, or what about the workers? Well, we're trying to make it better for them or make a better environment or so forth. So unions aren't necessarily negative, but they've got to be heard and they've got to be.
And in fact, handing it back to the union environment, as you know, I've been involved with unions at quite a high level, a national level, and they can be part of the problem-solving process if brought inside the tent and actually, as you say, hand the problem back to the people who've got to deal with it and who've got to action it. This was actually going to be a question I was going to bring up, which was in the case of real live example cases of plant closures. The traditional way of doing it, of course, is that you get a bunch of consultants in and they close a plant and people are made redundant. The alternative option is following exactly the process you've discussed, which is taking that vision of what it's going to look like. How is tomorrow going to be different from today in a positive way? And that, yes, there's going to be difficulties as a result of the plant or the office or the factory closures. But actually, there is, for a reason, it is to create a better tomorrow. And therefore, how is that transition managed? And the great successes that have occurred of when that has been worked through by the people who are going to be involved in the closures themselves, how they manage it, the managed exit from the organization, the assistance from the organization for those who have to go, so that they create a better tomorrow that actually is going to benefit the grouping as a whole in the future. And handing that problem to the people directly involved was massively powerful and effective in actually generating and engendering that positive environment where, in fact, in the traditional method would have been handled in a very negative and, from a human point of view, a very bad way. So it's not just we're going to grow the organization, it's to contraction creates the same opportunities to employ the processes you're suggesting, I think, Adrian.
I think so. I think if I was to give an example from my own experience where everything wasn't necessarily done right, and I've been an interim manager for many years, and I was asked to come into a business. I thought I was there to switch the lights off. The business was really struggling, making loss. It was in the aviation sector. There was a lot of demand. There was real-time critical logistical support was necessary, airside support as well. And we had a different principle that was being squeezed out, if you like, by a lot of the bigger players, how to make that business survive. And I think it was pretty early on. Hang on a second. We are losing money here. But if we did a few key changes and looked after the money, bring in the bad debts, more smart about how we did our delivery, and we had a lot of short-term labor that we're employing, why are we employing so much short-term labor when we should be utilizing the resources we already have? So let's get better organized and better led. And it took a couple of weeks to sort of understand this by listening, and everyone thinks, right, I'm here, I'm in charge, right, this is what I say, got to do, the old classic sergeant major's here or whatever. But actually, you've got two of these. So is listening and understanding what the art of the possible is. And we collectively, and it wasn't just, it wasn't top down, it was actually the group could see there was opportunity. We could win new business if only we did that. It took, therefore, confidence of the leadership to understand that there was, I say leadership, we had a chairman who said, right, that's good, we can do that. He's putting the money down, so you've got to repay that money. But if the profit, we had a target, if we made a certain profit, brought it back to profit, we could sell the business as part of a joint venture on an equal basis. And ultimately, over the year, that's exactly what we did. You're right there were harsh decisions. We had to reduce the manpower. We had over 1,000 people. Actually, there were casualties of that. A good 30% certainly went, and more went over time. Not everyone was promoted. As I said, we removed a layer of leadership. The beauty about that was it wasn't driven by a vision and culture, but it was driven by behaviors. My behaviors at the top to make sure others were behaving the same way as me. Not everyone did, but actually there were group decisions and actually understanding, right, if you can do something, right, go and do it. And they were empowered to make, so actually they were coming to work, as we said right at the start, to have a say in their destiny. It doesn't matter how big or small their sphere of influence was, but actually in their little work area, if they could make something happen more effectively to be more conducive for everyone else. And let's trial that. And that was about creating this holding environment to enable what works, what doesn't work, or applying some adaptive thought process to the appreciation of the problem. And where we got to.
And you just hit the nail on the head. Empowerment is so important, allowing people, as you say, the headroom to actually make a difference, to become involved, to become emotionally involved, to become energized. I think that's the empowerment. The word itself suggests energizing people. And I think if it's done correctly, certainly the study of culture and performance that was undertaken by Kotter did unquestionably conclude that organizations that are agile and adaptive and stakeholder focused were and are the ones that really do prosper in almost any environment, because they have that capability to ride the storm. That culturally and structurally they're set in such a way that their resilience is enhanced dramatically. And that, I think, is what you've been saying here, isn't it, Adrian?
We had 9 major carriers we were supporting out of Heathrow. We had other places as well. They were significant stakeholders. And what was happening previously is that more product and more items were being put on board just to keep them quiet in the past, which is not necessarily right either. Yes, they were benefiting, but actually it wasn't an efficient process, and we were giving away what was our profit effectively. So we had to engage them in the whole process to do some demand management. How many people you got on your plane going from here to Heathrow today? And all that sort of stuff. Let's manage that process, and how can we engage them in the planning matrices and whatever. We actually introduced a completely new system of that. Brought in MS Dynamics, and when we were talking a while ago here, it was over 10 years ago. So we brought in a new system, and we were learning the system and how does that work. So that caused a lot of disruption in the business. But the point was, I think goes back to what you said right at the start. People were engaged in the challenge and the task of making it more efficient. And certainly there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that allowed us to generate success. That was quite important. But therefore, the main carriers were understanding that we were getting demand management balance, and they were getting the right product, right time, right place. And therefore, they could see that there was a success happening, that people were more engaged. There was more positive communication. There was a failure at one point. But actually, rather than being pulled out over the coals and it was very negative, it was a positive experience. This didn't work. Why not? This is really bad. Let's talk about how we can make it better. Yeah, let's do that, because we can. And that was so much more positive. In fact, Oh, that was the best dressing gown I've ever had. You got that role. Yes, I know. And this is what we're going to do about it. This is what we're going to do about it. That was the critical piece. And so I'll take that kind of mistake every time, and that you can do something about it. And you knew, and it was part of the change, and it should not happen again. It wouldn't happen again. It didn't.
And a
That's
very
great.
positive experience when stakeholders, particularly your customers, are feeding back constructively into an environment where change is happening positively, is actually a real validation of the process that you're suggesting here with the adaptive leadership. That you've got the stakeholders, the customers on board, they're part of the team that's making the process more effective, more agile, more adaptive.
Ultimately, in a year's time, that example, we did the deal with the joint venture, which was great, much bigger player, much different approach. Contracts with the main carriers were unsettled by this, and they actually said, this is the service we want, this is the criteria we want, this is what we've been experienced, nothing should change, which was very interesting, and that shaped the deal. Firstly, that was great to hear. And then the second point, which is even more personally gratifying, was the assumption that the big company would come in, they'll take away and they'll put their systems in, and we'll get rid of them, get rid of those people. Actually, over half of the leaders remained in that business because they'd come on such a journey. And if that happened a year earlier, they could have picked up that business for nothing, got rid of those leaders and just put their own people in and carried on in a different way. Actually, they were able to stand up, fight their corner. This is how we do things here because that's what the customer wants. And actually, there was a further bunch of lessons and change that rippled back into the carrier that took us over. So I stepped aside, I was the interim, but it was really gratifying that those people had learned and understood. And it wasn't about hard skills. Some of it was. It was about how they behaved and how they led and how they improved. And it was the mindset, it was the culture. And as you said, culture trumps it every time.
Culture and people. And Adrian, could you just run us through those steps again, just for summary for our dear listener and viewer?
Run through them as sort of run through them as 1 to 7. So we're talking about the Heinfeld and Linsky model of adaptive leadership, and it's getting on the balcony, making sense of your environment, identifying the adaptive challenge. How can you work, and what is the new way of working within that business? Creating the holding environment. So what is holding you back? How can that new way of working operate in this space and give that space to learn and grow? Cooking the conflict, obviously that's managing the pros and cons and slings and arrows, but that's harnessing the energy for positive outcomes rather than negative outcomes. Maintain a disciplined approach. So adaptive work is hard. It can be avoided because you get involved in your day-to-day and you'll do that separately. Actually address that first. Give back the work back to those people. Give back the work. So that's getting people with the problem to think differently and operate differently, how they will operate in that environment. And the one that I really love is protecting the voices of leadership from below. That's so often overlooked, and I think that's absolutely critical to speak to it.
That's fantastic. And I will make sure that those points are identified clearly on the podcast notes when this is published. Adrian, that's really fascinating, and it really accords with all the change course planning that we're doing. We're just rolling out our change leadership courses across the country this coming year, 2025, and it really that gels perfectly with what Adrian's just presented. So Adrian Stratta, thank you again. Leadership is something that both Adrian and I feel very strongly about, particularly in the change environment, but more generally in the change environment, it's about people, leadership, culture, and empowerment, and one to take away over the Christmas break and thereafter in every change that you plan to do. So Adrian Stratta, thank you very much indeed. We'll put all the necessary links in the podcast. No doubt Adrian will be back with some more insights and value that we can pass on very soon. Adrian, thank you very much indeed.
Always a pleasure. Good to speak. Thanks, Barry.
And before we go, just a reminder, please do like, do share, and please do subscribe to this podcast and ensure that you pass it on to everybody you know. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.